Hey guys, welcome back to 𝐸𝐤𝐤, the cooking channel that's not so useless. If you're Chinese, you know it is steeped in our tradition that you typically eat dinner together as a family, as a sign of affection. This means that dishes are placed in the center of the dinner table, which equates to a free-for-all for who gets what. Now imagine that there's a dumpling that you've been eyeing since the moment you sat down, and then someone grabs it before you. So, today's episode begins the Grab Your Own Plate series, where we go over recipes that keep your plate company, not someone else's. And to fill your plate is a great beef stew, nice and hearty, and goes well with some rice or bread. But before we start with the recipe, I need to preface to those following along at home. This recipe can be made in a day, but it will taste so much better if cooked over 2 days. Also, the cooking process will be a lot easier if you have a cast iron pan and a casserole pot. So to begin, we have a boatload of ingredients: beef shin, red wine, light soy sauce, star anise, kidney beans, tomato paste, bay leaves, sugar, salt, black pepper, celery, tomato, carrot, potato, and finally, garlic. Oh, and we also need water, but everyone should already have that. Now, for the quantities. For about 8 to 10 servings, we'll need 1.2 kilograms of beef shin, 1 cup of red wine, half a cup of light soy sauce, 1 whole star anise, 240 grams of kidney beans, 2 tablespoons of tomato paste, 3 bay leaves, sugar for seasoning, salt for seasoning, black pepper for seasoning, 2 sticks of celery, 4 tomatoes, 2 carrots, 2 medium-sized potatoes, 4 cloves of garlic, and 3 cups of water. So, let's start off by seasoning our beef shins. Here we have about 1.2 kilograms of beef shin, washed, somewhat diced, and drip dried ahead of time. We want to give this meat a nice sear before we stew it, so we're going to extract as much moisture from the beef shin as we can using paper towels. Once you've given the meat a nice pat down, season the meat with salt and black pepper, and then give them a nice mix through. After thoroughly mixing, wrap the meat up and put them in the fridge for a few hours. In the meantime, we can prep the vegetables. We want to peel the skin off the tomatoes, so begin by boiling enough water to submerge the tomatoes completely. Score the tomatoes and submerge them in the boiling water for about 1 to 2 minutes, or until you can peel the skin. And then, just go ahead and peel the skin. Cut the tomatoes into sixths, remove the core, and put the cut tomatoes aside for later. Top and tail the onion, and remove the top layer of the onion along with the skin. We're going to cut the onion into 16ths, so cut the onion in half, lengthwise, and then half again widthwise. And then finally, quarter the onion around the circumference. Break apart any onion pieces if they're still stuck to the stem or root, and then put aside the onion. Similar to the onion, we're going to top and tail the carrot, and then peel the skin off. Cut the carrots into big pieces, so that they stay intact during the stewing process. Before we cut the potatoes, prepare a container of cold water to place the cut potatoes in, to prevent them from developing a pink hue. Peel the skin off the potatoes, and give the peeled potatoes a good wash. Cut the potatoes into sixths, and then place them in the cold water. With the celery sticks, slice them to about 2 finger widths and then put them aside. Lastly, with our garlic cloves, top and tail, and then crush them to remove the skin. Now that all of our prep is done, it is time to start cooking. So there's 4 things we're going to do: sear the meat, brown the vegetables, deglaze the pan with the meat still in it, and then finally stew all the ingredients together. Since I am using an iron cast pan, I'm going to heat it up nice and hot whilst I brown the vegetables. For my casserole pot, I'm going to turn the heat on high and pour in enough oil to lay at the bottom. When the oil is nice and hot, turn the heat down low and add in the garlic so we don't end up burning it. When the garlic starts to get golden, turn it over and continue cooking. After about a minute, or when the garlic is equally as golden on the other side, turn the heat up high and add in the onions, and cook until golden. If you find that the garlic is starting to burn, make sure to take them out and put them back in later. Once your onions are golden, add in and cook your carrots and celery for about a minute. Afterwards, we add in our peeled tomatoes and the tomato paste, along with 1 cup of water. Give this a good stir, and when the liquid starts to boil, turn your heat down low and let it simmer whilst we tend to the meat. So with our extremely hot pan, with the heat on high, we're going to add oil and let it get nice and smoking hot. Then we're going to add our beef shin and let it sear for about a minute or until the beef gets a nice crust. Before we turn the beef over, be sure to ladle some oil on top so that there's enough oil in the pan to sear the other side of the meat. Flip the beef over and sear the other side. Once we get a good enough sear on both sides, reduce the heat to medium and deglaze the pan with the red wine. And then, add the soy sauce, bay leaves, and star anise, and give the ingredients a good toss around in the liquid. After the liquid reaches a boil, turn off the heat and transfer the contents of the pan into the casserole pot. For the casserole pot, turn the heat back up high and start stirring the stew. And don't forget to put the garlic back in if you took it out earlier. After a good stir, add in about 2 cups of water and give it a good stir again. When the liquid starts to boil, put the lid on, turn the heat down to medium, and let it stew for about 40 minutes. Once the 40 minutes are up, turn the heat up high and add the potatoes. We turn the heat up high here to counteract the drop in temperature as a result of the cold potatoes. With the potatoes in, give the stew a good stir and then put the lid back on. Let the stew cook for another 20 minutes at medium heat. And make sure that you stir the stew around every 5 minutes to prevent the potatoes from sticking to the bottom of the pot. Now, depending on whether you're cooking this in just 1 day or across 2 days, the following steps will deviate. If you're cooking this in 1 day, the stew is essentially done. And as you can see, the potatoes are done and the meat is already tender. All you need to do now is season the stew to your liking with either salt, sugar, and/or black pepper, and then add in the kidney beans and let it cook for another 5 minutes. But if you want your stew to have more flavor, then I highly suggest stewing across 2 days. So continuing on, after the last stir of the potatoes at the end of the 20 minutes, you can season the stew with salt, sugar, or black pepper. However, we just added about 1/2 tablespoon of sugar, as we found that the stew was already flavorful enough, and it would only get better in the following day. Put the lid back on, then turn the heat on high for another minute. After the 1 minute is up, turn the heat off, and do not touch the pot. We're going to leave the stew out overnight to let it develop its flavor more. And to prevent it from going off, we must ensure that none of the condensation on the bottom of the lid falls back into the stew until we turn the heat back on. So, this means that you must absolutely not touch the pot until tomorrow. Fast forward to the next day. The stew is currently a gelatinous blob. Turn the heat on low to slowly reheat the stew. We don't want the heat to be too high, or else the bottom of the stew will burn. We're aiming to reheat the stew until the consistency goes back to that resembling of a stew. Be sure to give the stew a gentle stir every so often, until you no longer feel that resistance stemming from a gelatinous stew. Bring the stew up to a slow boil, and then add in the kidney beans. Give the stew another good stir, and then leave it to cook for another 5 minutes. And then, the stew is done. Let everyone grab their own plate, a carbohydrate, and a great big serving of that hearty, delicious beef stew. This dish definitely pairs well with a bowl of rice, or a nice toasty Vietnamese roll, so be sure to have these ready when the stew is done. So guys, that is my family's recipe for beef stew. If you ever get the chance to try this recipe out, be sure to leave a comment below and tell me how it went. See ya!